Well, hey there, Beth. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Confident Sober Women podcast. I'm so excited to have you and to hear a little bit more about your story. And then we're going to get into a whole bunch of other stuff. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you, let you share a little bit more about your recovery story, and then we're going to chat.
Okay. Well, I was a newscaster for 30 years, lived all over the US. And some of the more major markets I worked in were like Oklahoma City, Houston, Philadelphia, New York, Minnesota. And I kind of had a niche as a newscaster. I know some people love anchoring, but I love to be where the action is, kind of at the intersection of chaos and adrenaline, shocker for an addict. And but I loved being out in the field, in the streets, as we call it, covering the big stories. And we used to joke if it was murder, death, destruction, and mayhem, call Beth. They'd send me because I was also on a go team when I was in Philly, in New York. And, so essentially, if a mass disaster happened, plane wrecks, 9/11, for instance, I was working at 9/11, you grab your bag, you go. And I loved that. I loved that the charge of all of it. And what I loved about being a reporter, because I used to be bored as an anchor in the studio, and I'm like, I want to be where they are. Well, talking to the people, and I want to tell their stories. And that seems interesting and exciting. And what I have learned over time is I love to hear the survivor stories, what people go through, major events in their lives, how they get through it, how they get to the other side, if they get to the other side. And that always fascinated me. And who knew that, one day I'd be telling my own survivor story, but here we are.
That's right. Oh, thank you so much for sharing some of your professional journey. That's wild. And I totally understand what you mean about that intersection of adrenaline. And it does seem very fitting. As soon as you said that's where you like to be, where the action is, I was like, I can relate to that. So can you share a little bit more about kind of what happened at maybe at the end of your journey and then kind of how you got sober and what's been up with you since then?
Yeah. So it was around 2005, 2006. Um, I used to be a party girl, in news, and I always worked the night shift generally. And when you get off at 11 or midnight, what's open? The bars.
Mhm.
And so we news people would go sometimes, not all the time, but fairly often throughout the week, go and have a couple of drinks after work to decompress in the hopes you don't take home what you've seen that day, kind of get it all out of your system and move on. But when you cover that for 30 years, you at some point also start to absorb the trauma of what you
Mhm.
see, what you cover, because I was always in the trenches with first responders, emergency crews, that sort of thing. So, there's that element of it. And then in early 2005, 6, 7, and 8, a number of things were happening in my life, which aren't an excuse. They're just part of life stressors that everybody faces that I did not handle well. And one of them being I was going through divorce, and then my mother died very unexpectedly, and we were extremely close. So that was a bit of a blow. And while my mother was dying, my stepdad had a quadruple bypass,
Oh my
and
gosh.
I was always kind of the caretaker kid in the family.
Mm.
And so I was dealing with my mom's burial, getting my dad through a quadruple bypass, and I stayed to take care of him for a month. And then I also got notice that my job in Philadelphia, my contract wasn't being renewed because Comcast was buying NBC. And so what does new management do? They bring, they clean house and bring their own people.
Oh my God.
So all of these things happened. And that's about when I noticed that my partying went from partying to I needed this more and more and more. Because after I kind of got all the family matters taken care of, got the divorce done, found a new job in Minnesota working for Fox News. So I went to Minnesota after I took care of all of that. And I never gave myself space and room to grieve and to mourn. And, because I had to power through getting all these things done. And I turned to the bottle more and more. And, I went from being a party girl to more of a professional drinker. And instead of just drinking maybe after the news, it would be on the weekends. And then it became during the week. And then it became several days during the week, never on the job, but outside of the job. And I got my first DUI in 2007, right after the 35W bridge collapsed in Minneapolis into the Mississippi River. And I think about 145 cars went to the water.
Oh my.
It was just a couple of weeks later that I got my first DUI, and we'd gone out after work and, blow off some steam. And lo and behold, I got busted for a DUI.
Mm,
And there was a little blurb in the paper, and there was, a little bit of attention, not a lot though. Um, and I don't know if that was a blessing or a curse, to be honest with you, because that first one just didn't hurt enough. And I got called in the office. My boss is like, "Do you have a problem?" And shame and stigma, being what it is, keeps you stuck in a corner. And, I said, "No, I don't. This is a one off. It won't happen again." I didn't want to be labeled an alcoholic. I didn't want to be an alcoholic. No, I don't think anybody grows up and they're like, "That'll be a good time. Let's blow up your life. See how that goes. This life that you worked so hard and sacrificed so much for."
mhm,
And, I just couldn't bring myself to accept his offer of help. And I think sometimes help is a four-letter word. So I try to pivot and use the word support, because when you go, "Let me help you," and nobody wants help. We're all going to do it ourselves. And as a reporter, being in the trenches every day, you get to be very strong. You get a backbone. And I'm like, I will get on top of this. I will get in control of this. And what you learn over time is alcohol doesn't negotiate, right? In the world of relationships, alcohol is a taker. And it's an equal opportunity disease. It affects everybody. And you don't control it, it controls you. And that's what you learn in your alcoholic journey. And so I told my boss, "No, it's a one off. It'll never happen again." I liked him so much. We had a great working relationship, and it's kind of like when your father tells you he's disappointed in you,
yeah.
it's just a stab to the heart. And I'm like, "I got this. I will make this right." And he said, "Fox has a zero tolerance policy, though, and you violated your contract and your morality clause in your contract, too." He said, "If we can get you to keep the job, I can't guarantee I can, this can never happen again. You will be fired." And
Mhm,
he offered again, "Can we get you help?" And I said, "No, I don't need it. I just help, that word. Don't help me. I'm the reporter. I go out and help people and I solve their problems. People come to me, and I was
mhm,
just strong and like I was convinced I'd be able to get a handle on it. And so I white knuckled it for a little bit and for some months. But alcoholism being what it is, it's a progressive disease. And, when it gets in your system, you crave it, boy. And so over time, the cravings started to come back. And, some social drinking quickly evolved into much more again. And it was in 2008. Oh my goodness, it was this weekend, 16 years ago. Halloween. Wow, I just realized that. Halloween, 16 years ago. I'd gone out with coworkers and I knew I was getting drunk. And so I tabbed out because I thought I got to go get home. Why I didn't take a cab or an Uber, I don't know. I mean, it's alcoholic stinking thinking. But I got in my car and I drove home and I hit another car on the highway at 80 miles an hour.
mm.
And fortunately, the driver wasn't injured, thank God. The car was damaged. It was a fender bender. And he did sue me later on. When I pulled up to my house, which I don't remember, I'm a blackout drinker. So, the memories kind of come and go. And through police reports and talking to my attorney, I've been able to piece together what happened. But when I showed up at my home, the police were there waiting for me and took me to jail for the second time. And, that was definitely a moment when I woke up. I blacked out for 36 hours. When I woke up in the drunk tank at the county jail, and I had the orange jumpsuit on, I still had handcuffs on. The women in the holding cell with me were watching the TV because what do you do when you're in jail? Either talk about what you do, or you're watching Jerry Springer. And the news was on when I woke up, a big screen TV too. And the newscasters, who I've partied with many times in my life, were talking about me and what was on the TV, but my mugshot. Um,
Nice.
yeah, my big mugshot was on TV. So I got to sit there, and when I saw that, and I'm hungover and I'm all the things. And I'm like, and then I realize kind of where I am. And I'm like, my life as I know it is over. And
Mhm.
I dreaded everything that happened next. And when the my attorney wouldn't bail me out of jail for several days because I didn't learn my lesson the first time.
Mhm.
So he eventually did bail me out. And when the deputy was walking me out in the elevator, and I said, "How bad is it out there?" And she goes, "Oh, all the newsies are here." She goes, "You even have inside edition." And
Mhm.
I'm like, "Oh God, okay." I said, "Any chance you're going to let me?" And I know they have a back door. "Any chance you're going to let me out the back door?" And she goes, "Not a chance." And I said, "Fair." And she goes, "One more thing. When you got out last year, I walked you out too." And I'm like, "Oh my God," just like, I couldn't hate myself anymore at that moment. And then when I finally did get out of the actual jail facility, my attorney parked 10 blocks away. So I would have to do the walk of shame in front of everybody. He wasn't going to whip up and rescue me. And so I did the walk of shame, which I have caught many people doing and used to pride myself on. And I was now the walk of shame. And, Rand got in the car with the attorney. And, he said, "Beth, you've got a problem. You need treatment. You need help. The first one, we might consider a party crime. The second one, you're in some deep trouble, deep.
Mhm.
And everything in Minnesota, if you get more than one DUI in 10 years, everything is doubled. Fines, court cost,
Mhm.
lawsuits, anything. It's all, doubled. And what's really crummy is, so I lost my driver's license for 1 year, and the authorities also seized my car and then sold it at auction. And what really sucks about that, besides the obvious, I paid my car off 2 weeks before.
Oh, no.
And just, and at the time I was so happy. Look at me adulting. I'm paying off bills. I own my car outright. Yay. I'm doing the things. I'm living the life. Yeah, no, that ended. And so when I got home, then my boss at Fox News called and said, "Come to the TV station. We have some forms for you to fill out." And I'm like, "Well, let me just further humiliate myself." I said, "I actually can't get there. They took my car." And he's like, "We'll send you a taxi." And so when I got to the TV station, and I was close with all my coworkers. We had a lot of mutual respect, and I really liked them. But when I walked into the building, no one would make eye contact with me, not a person. And I don't blame them at all. They didn't know what I'd become. I brought a lot of bad press on them, and they were all going to have to deal with it too. And kind of, the snickers and this snidey comments, because it's kind of hard to be a crime reporter when you commit a crime. And so my boss, again, I met with him, and whew, smoke was coming out of his ears. He was mad. And when you really disappoint someone that you really like, there was all of that at play there. And I'm like, there's no recovering from this.
Mhm.
And so he came in the office, he said, "I warned you last year, if you got another DUI, that would be it. You would be fired." And he said, "It's really a shame. You helped to put us on the map, and you had a job for life." I mean, how nice to know you're going to be guaranteed a paycheck 2 weeks, every 2 weeks for the rest of your life. How nice, right?
Mhm.
Well, I'm an alcoholic and I messed that up, and it's my own fault. It's very self-inflicted. And he said, it's a shame because you would have had a job for life. But he said, as of today, you're no longer of service to us, no longer of use. You are fired. We kept the taxi here. You can take it home or you can go to treatment. It's your call. And I was just at the lowest moments at that time in my life, but it would get a whole bunch lower.
Mhm.
So over time, and I did go to treatment, and I did 30 days inpatient, but I very quickly, was sued by the guy I hit. My attorney fees were doubled, the fines, everything was, and so I put my house on the market to try and sell my house because I didn't have income coming in anymore. No one would buy it because it was my house.
Mm.
So it was foreclosed. So,
Oh.
I answered the door when the deputy served me papers, who I knew the deputy. And so that was super embarrassing. And, he said, "You got a month, you're going to be out. Otherwise, we'll kick you out, but your house is going to be foreclosed on." And so, I was broke, lost all of my friends at that time. And I don't besmirch them for that. They, had to back off and save themselves, from being in no one wanted to be associated with me. And I lost some family friendships. My stepdad in particular, we were very close, the one who had the quadruple bypass. We were best friends. We were very close. But it was a little bit of a different generation, and he considered alcoholism to be a character fault, not a disease. And, it just got worse from there, frankly. I started looking for a bridge to live under, and I applied for jobs at the grocery store. They wouldn't hire me. I applied for jobs at the mall. They wouldn't hire me. And I'm like, well, I'm either going to have to move again, where I don't know, or I got to figure this out. And I have dogs. I've always loved dogs. And always used like dog walkers or daycare when I would travel on assignment for various things. So I thought, well, I've got my 2 feet in my bicycle, but given that it's December and in Minnesota, the snow is 5 feet tall because the snow doesn't melt until April. I can't use my bike, so I've got my 2 feet. What can I do? Nobody will hire me. And so I started to go to my neighbors, knock on their doors, and they all know me as having dogs, and said, "Can I walk your dogs for $20 while you're at work? I'll walk your dogs. I'll pick up their poop." And they said yes. So that is how I slowly started to put like food on my table. And over time, some of my clients asked me if I could daycare their dogs. And I'm like, well, I can't do that because I'm losing my home. I don't have a place to daycare and keep the dogs. But one of my clients who didn't know me at all before the DUIs, and I just started walking her dogs then, was kind enough she said she had a warehouse that I needed to go and renovate if I wanted to use it, but she would rent it to me at a really reduced rate. And this would give me someplace to be able to increase the business from dog walking to doggy daycare to boarding to grooming. And I couldn't have been more grateful. So I took her up on it. And frankly, after I saw there was a bathroom in this vacant warehouse, I'm like, maybe I'm living here too. I don't know. I ended up, that very same client offered me the lower level of her home to live in until I could get on my feet, though. Isn't that amazing?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I did. And I slowly built this business up, because when your back's against the wall, you got to make something happen here. So I built the business up into a very viable and profitable business and had 11 employees by the end of year 3. And, working my program, doing the steps, I go to meetings, therapy ad nauseum, group therapy ad nauseum, outpatient treatment. I did it all. I went back to speak where I went to treatment to just, stay connected with alcoholics. I had a sponsor. I started working with alcoholics. And in fact, I took on a sober roommate up until my home was foreclosed, which helped immensely. And people started to approach me, businesses, about buying my doggy daycare. And I was like, really? You want to buy this? And I'm like, I can't sell it. I don't know what else I do with my life at this stage. I can't get back into TV. No one will hire me because I had begged the TV stations after my second DUI. And to my face, they said, not a chance. I was I was a hot potato. And they didn't want the bad press of bringing me on, which I don't blame them for that either. But more and more people then started to approach me about buying the business. And at this time, we kept about 40 or 60 dogs a day, which is very labor intensive. It's very exhausting. I loved it, but it's exhausting. It's like having a bunch of toddlers run around.
Yeah.
And so finally, the right offer came along. I was exhausted enough at that point, and that I thought, okay. And you kind of read the tea leaves, I believe. More offers kept coming, more and more. And I'm like, okay, there's something to this. The universe is telling me it's time to move on. So I took one of the offers, and on the day that I was handing the keys over to the new owner, KSTP in Minnesota, the ABC affiliate, called me out of the blue, one of the same stations. They were actually the station that said not a chance to my face. Called me out of the blue and said, we've been keeping tabs on you. We have this investigative producer job open. It's not on camera. It's behind the scenes. You'll be writing and shaping stories for other people. But if you want this job, we'd like to offer it to you. And I'm like, what's the difference now versus 3 years ago when nobody would touch me? Well, I'm sober. And I've done the work, and I put in the effort, and I continue to do the work. And, I've humbled myself, and I jumped. I was like, this is this is my lifeline. I've got to take it. I've got, and I want to take it. And it's right up my alley. And Hubbard Broadcasting, which owns that station, they're pretty well known for hiring people in recovery. You
Hmm.
know, not known for hiring drunks, but if you get in recovery and you work the program, they'll give you a shot. And so they did. They gave me a shot, and but they had some rules that I had to abide by, and which I was happy to do. Random testing, all sorts of things. Um, and I was able to slowly but surely kind of work my way back in, regain my credibility, my self-respect. I was scared to go back in the newsroom though, because news people, we talk, we chatter like everybody else. And but my first week back, almost all my colleagues would come up and ask me, are you sober? How do you feel? Are you scared? I'm like, well, yeah, I'm kind of scared. I mean, we know how the public can be with anonymous emails,
Hmm.
ruthless. And but I promised my bosses that you take this chance on me. And I never use the word you won't be disappointed. I don't believe in that. I told them I will make you proud. I'll make you proud that you did this move. I'm doing this for you and I'm doing this for me. And so I just, I'm tunnel vision, I'm setting the course, and I started doing what I do. And over time, breaking news happens all the time, right? And just one day when all of our reporters happened to be out of the building on their own assignments, there was a big breaking news story. And they looked at me, and they're like, you ready? And I said, let's go.
Hmm.
And I just got chills saying it. I was ready. I was ready to do what I'd spent 30 years doing. It was the love of my life. And I was so grateful to even be back, that they gave me that shot. And so I was able to get back into TV news. And, I had a pretty good career before the first runaround. Um, I didn't have the perfect life. I wasn't rich, but unlike everyone in America, the bills were getting paid. Life was all right. And as good as my life was then, it was exponentially better the second time around, because I was living a clean life and I had my brain back, and
Hmm.
I wanted to make my bosses proud.
Hmm. Wow, Beth, thank you so much for sharing all that and so honestly and vulnerably. Truly, when we share our stories in whatever way we choose to do it, it's such a vulnerable moment, but it is truly how it
Mhm.
works. Like, this is definitely how it works when we spread the message of hope, because as long as we're alive, there's always hope for any of us, for anything, and it's very difficult to see that when you're in the depths of the pit, when
Yes.
you've been hammered and hammered and hammered by life, that even in the beginning when you're talking about, like your mom and then your stepdad and then, the thing, it's like, gosh, just keep coming, and some seasons of life are really like that. We just keep getting kicked when we're down. And then one of the things that I really love about your story and listening to you share it is just the perseverance, because not everybody does get up. I think that we think that we're like, oh, well, they had that problem. Like, you just, you did the thing, you just got up and whatever, did the thing. Well, but everybody doesn't do that. And
Mhm.
I try to share that as often as I can, particularly in my work with clients and things, because so often they think like they're the only one, right? Or that they can never change. I just had a client, actually, I was thinking about her the entire time you were talking. Totally different story, completely different, but so similar. Just can't see a way out, like can't see, and she's lost all of her friends. She's embarrassed herself. She's done this. And I said to her to literally today, I said, um, I think would you be willing to consider that there will be a new you? There'll be a new person. We're not going back to the old you, because she'll say, "Oh, I wish I could feel the way I used to or be my old self." But I'm like, that old self doesn't exist anymore. Time has passed. Things have gone on. We're building a new self. And that is the hope that we get in recovery. And whether it's recovery from substance abuse, whether we decide to become courageous enough to do the trauma work or whatever we decide to do, the hope on the other side of that is powerful. And
It's so powerful. And, when you strip people of hope, what's the reason to live? And you do when you're in it and you're raw and you can't see outside yourself. And you're like, there is no way that I'm going to come out of this. There's just no way.
Mhm.
And so that really is also one of the motivators about why I started writing the book back in the day. Also, I was on house arrest for 37 days. And that's a lot of time to be up in your head,
Yeah.
and I've been a reporter and a journalist my entire life. And so I'm a writer and I always write my own stories. And honestly, I started for therapeutic reasons to sit down at the computer and just like get the yuck inside of me out.
Hmm.
And so I started writing for that reason. But as I kept going, then, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have all these things that I've learned from the medical experts and the therapist and the trauma and the EMDR people that I've worked with. And, you can't go through all of this and not have some sort of takeaway.
Hmm.
And and we in recovery or addiction, we don't listen to people who haven't been where we've been, right? Because they don't generally don't. We will tend to believe, we need to hear from someone who's been through the fire like we have. Like, okay, you've been through the fire. What worked for you?
Yeah.
We all want to hear what worked for you, because even if you have cancer, chemo doesn't work for everybody. So you got to figure out what works for you. And as I was putting all of these chapters and stories together, I'm like, there's some pretty good takeaway here that
Yeah.
maybe the things that I've learned will resonate with other people. And whether it's, alcoholism, drug addiction, sex, relationships, domestic violence, whatever people trying to recovery, regret, reinvent. Um, there's takeaway from my story. They might be able to see themselves in my struggle, in my surrender, because you have to surrender, and then in the strength. And so that's really, why I started to become public about this. And this is important too, the judge in my case, who was supposed to throw the book at me. Um, when I did finally make it to my court hearing, and there's a whole bunch of surreal stories that I share that happened in jail, outside of going to the court hearing, that are very, very eye opening.
Mhm.
So I go to the judge. The prosecutor wanted me to go to state prison for 90 days. Of course, I was horrified, and she stated in court, given the the high profile nature of my job and me, that, she thought this was an appropriate punishment because she could send a message to many people.
Mhm.
And I don't blame her. If I were her, I would have done the same thing. I mean, she's doing her job. And I have not one but two DUIs, so that qualifies me for state prison at this point. But I was horrified, and I'm like, like, I don't. At least I'll have a place to live for 90 days. But the judge said, I'd like to see you in my chambers privately. And I thought, well, a really bad day's about to get a whole bunch worse. So I go into his chambers, and he was standing there, though, with his arms out like this to hug me. And that was the first moment of mercy or compassion that
Yeah.
I'd been given in any of this. And
Mhm.
I didn't expect it from anyone, because I'm fully aware that all of this is self imposed and I did this to people. They didn't do it to me.
Yeah.
And I accept all of that and I own it. And he said, I've watched everything you've done to try and get sober and some steps you're taking before you even got to the hearing. And he said, when your name first appeared on my docket, he said, I knew you'd be in my courtroom here one day. And he goes, it's really unpleasant, isn't it? I'm like, I just fell apart. And he goes, well, I want you to know, I'm not going to send you to state prison. You will have consequences. And I did spend 2 weekends in jail and then a third weekend at the workhouse, which is a labor camp in Minnesota. And then the incredible fines and the house arrest and random drug testing at will, middle of the night, weekends, whatever. They could stop by anytime. Um, he said, and here's why I'm not going to send you to state prison, though. Before your hearing today, he said, I went to my meeting and I got my 20-year chip.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said, so I know you can overcome this. I've done it. And when you hear someone say they could do it, you're like, okay, all right, pep talk. And
Mhm.
he said, but I ask one thing of you: when the day comes and you're on the other side of this, pay it forward. So that's
Yeah.
part of what I'm doing.
I love that. And I've heard stories similar to that. And I've experienced it a little bit myself too. so often, like because people who are very much like us or in recovery, they show up all over our lives.
Oh,
It's
oh, yeah.
it's all over our lives, unexpected, and so much more grace and compassion can be given in those ways, which I love that. And I think that when people are open though, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's an energy thing or, a spiritual component or both. But when people are kind of open-minded and open-hearted to what is going on with them, like what they have done and been through, and when even if without their words, they are acting as if or showing or doing that they understand their part in it, right? They understand their part in it and they're taking some responsibility for that, right? I mean, it might be very, minimal at first because we have to learn how to do that. But
Yes.
but I feel like there's a something about that. Maybe or you can speak to this. There's a something about that difference where somebody has some of that in them and then others can kind of feel it. It's probably an energetic experience, right? That other people can feel that or there's a knowing to others around us that that is the case versus somebody who's like kind of stuck in self, unwilling. They're gonna just keep doing what they want to do. They don't think that they have a problem. They're not ready, or they didn't think they hurt anybody. They're only hurting themselves. Whatever they say, don't want to go through those motions of taking personal responsibility. I just think there's a difference, and I'm just not sure if you've ever had like experience or you know about that or can speak to it at all.
Yeah, I can, and I'll tell you one story that's included in the book, which is when I went to jail and I was put in a cell with a woman who was also having a very bad day, like myself, and what do you talk about when you're in there? And what'd you do? How'd you get here? Are you in trouble? You're gonna lose your job. And she said she, was pretty upset. And she was like, yeah, I got a DUI. I'm thinking I'm probably gonna get fired. And I said, really? Why? And she goes, well, it's my second DUI. And I'm like, "Ooh, okay, well, that's starting to get up there, right? Now it's a thing. And I was like, well, where do you work? Because I was still, problem solving reporter me, like, let me at least make her life better. And I'm not going to say the organization or her name, obviously, but it was an organization that campaigns against drinking and driving, you know, and she was the vice president of said organization. Any other day it might have been a story in my world, of just how someone in that position is putting other people's lives at risk. But here I was sitting in jail with her because I put people's lives at risk, so we were one and the same.
Hmm.
And I'm like, it's just such an equal opportunity disease and such a taker. Alcohol takes, takes, takes.
Hmm.
And, those were a couple of very profound things that happened along the way. And yeah, you see people, and I was in denial for a long time. I was in denial and I own that. But I look at it too, like, okay, well, I kept hiding behind my lies and my denial, and look where it got me in the worst place of my life. So, Beth McDonough, pull up your bootstraps. You've asked people a lot of hard questions in your career. Sorry, my dog is like moving around in the background.
Hmm.
Anyway, I apologize for that. But I'm like, you know what? You asked other people hard questions. Now you got to answer them. And actions have consequences. And I am a big believer in accountability,
Hmm.
so I owned it and I took my lumps because I caused them. And I think that is so incredibly helpful. And when I work with, alcoholics or people who come to me for help or ask me to be their sponsor, and they're like, okay, don't tell my husband, and I don't want work to know, and I don't want, and I'm like, oh, no, 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 that's not how we're going to work together, because I've seen that. And people who are still hiding and, because the shame, the stigma, whatever, they don't want people to know that they are an alcoholic or they're labeled. People need to know you're an alcoholic to support you. You know, they can't support what they don't know. And so if you want help from around, and people will help people who help themselves, if you want the support, and taking someone's offer, like my boss offered to send me to treatment the first time, um, it's so incredibly important to take that help because it doesn't make you weak. It amplifies the resources that come your way.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. And when you were sharing your story, just kind of listening to the different steps, here you were out of a home, and like you're trying to, you went to your neighbors. I mean, so I think it's like a personal quality about that. Like that's different than some of our fellows. And so
Yes.
I'm kind of wondering, like, where did that come from? Is that something you've always had? Because maybe you had that even in active addiction, maybe not. Is it something that you can kind of pinpoint now, like through your recovery, you can see like, oh, this is where this came from. Like, why were you able to just keep trying, like keep getting, because not like again, because not everybody does that, because people are like, oh, I
Mhm.
didn't have a choice. I'm like, no, that's not actually true. We all have choices. Some people choose to stay in the bed and never get out. Some people
Yes.
choose to end their lives. Some people choose to get up and get out. Like there's a lot of, we all have choices. I don't care what we think. It seems
Hmm.
impossible, but so I'm wondering for you, like, why were you able to just keep trying in the worst moments of your life, Why, and then
Uh-huh.
start a business and then keep trying that, because that doesn't just happen for everybody. So I'm just curious if you know.
I think because I dropped such an explosive atomic bomb in my life.
Mm,
And it was my fault. There's no one to blame. I couldn't point to someone else that, oh, this was done to me or I was wronged or blah, blah, blah. No, I was the wrongdoer. And the consequences were so punitive, and they're supposed to be. That's the point of consequences, right? Um, it was so harmful, or it hurt. It hurt enough. That's what I want to say. All of the consequences and the public backlash and all of it hurt enough, with the second one, because the first one, there was a little blurb. I got in a little trouble. I was able to keep my job. So
mhm.
I think it was I don't know if it was a good thing or a bad thing at that time. But when it hurts badly enough, you don't want to put your hand back on the stove if you've done that before.
Right.
And you look in the mirror and I'm like, well, I did this to myself. It's up to me to get up and get going. And when it hurts that bad, you don't ever want to go through it again.
But
And
I guess what I'm saying too, and I totally agree with you, I've experienced that too, and I also feel that and believe it. However, there are, and you probably know some of them, and if you've been around the rooms of AA for long enough or in life, like there are many people who could have had the exact same scenario as you, like the same stuff, but that yet they say things like, well, if I hadn't gone through this divorce, you mentioned
mm,
EMDR and your trauma. If my mom hadn't have been, I'm making this up, if she hadn't have been abusive, if my uncle hadn't have sexually abused me when I was 5. I mean, there's like people latch on to these kinds of things, right? And they become the narrative that keeps them away from being able to persevere towards the things that you were able to do in your life. So I know at the age you were an adult woman who, you've lived through some stuff, right? You've had some pain and some
yeah.
things happen in your life that you could have easily blamed. You said that I had no one to blame. Well, that's just not true either. You definitely could have found some things, but I'm just curious about why you think that might have been different for you. What about you that was different than our fellows who constantly do want to say, well, it's this, it's this, it's this.
I think it's my wiring. In that, as a reporter, I truly tried to help other people solve their problems. So I'm
Mhm.
kind of a problem solver anyway. And um, my wiring, I have been pretty, my mom would have said, I had tunnel vision for most of my life. Like once I lock onto something, we're going there. Uh, Case in point, I used to run marathons and
Mhm.
I blew out my back in the Chicago Marathon at mile 19 and I still finished that race. Then I
Mhm.
went to go get my surgery, to get my back repaired. So it's kind of my wiring, and I know what you're talking about because I've had some sponsees and people that I've worked with, and they kind of get stuck in the trauma bond. I see that where they're stuck in the sickness, and it's a lot of work to get to the other side. There's no fast forward button in recovery, and you actually have to sit down and break it all, including break yourself down, put all your gunk out there. and take a look at it. And I did. I
Mhm.
took a look at it, and I'm like, she's not even someone I would want to know. Like we got to fix this. This is,
Yeah.
and I don't want to live my life like that. That's not what I hoped I would grow up to be and do. So, what's the Dr. Phil statement? How's that working for you?
Right.
So I kind of looked at, okay, how'd alcohol work for me? Well, it didn't. It blew
Mhm.
up my life, and I'm the co-conspirator in blowing up my life. So, okay, I had to reframe it in my brain too, because there was a time when going out and partying was fun. So now
Mhm.
I had to reframe it of, for me, alcohol is poison. I
Mhm.
look at it as the enemy. I look at it as something that helped to destroy this life that I worked so hard to build.
Mhm.
And and that's not okay to me. So I need to remedy this. I've got to summon up my internal fortitude and start to lay brick after brick of a new foundation, because I looked at what all I'd done, and I didn't enjoy that. So I wanted to to switch it and make amends, live by example, honestly. And when I talk with people, they are stuck. And I just even went to a meeting on Monday, and a couple of folks were stuck. And I'm like, it's the stuck is temporary. Like, you
Mhm.
know, this can't be how you want to live the rest of your life. It can't be, right? Look at all the stuff that's going wrong and everything that's happening in your life. So if you don't want to keep doing that, well, you've got to do something different. What do they tell you in business? If you're not making money, change what you're doing. You've got to do something different.
Mhm.
And I was never a quitter,
Mhm.
i.e., the marathon story,
Yeah.
which is great professionally, though, as a reporter, really good. And that is a praised quality. Personally, not so good. You know, when you got to quit something, you got to quit it. But I had to, because alcohol just kept taking and taking and taking and taking. And it ran its course with me. And I wanted a better life than what I currently had because of alcohol. And if you
Yeah.
want something, whatever it is, a purse, a relationship, a job, or whatever, you're going to do whatever it takes to get what you want, or you're certainly going to try. And I
Mhm.
wanted sobriety enough to
Mhm.
do whatever it took.
Yeah, I say that a lot too, that we as human beings are not wired for discomfort really, and so we only
Right.
do what we want to do. Now, of course, there's lots of things in life that we have to do that we don't like. I don't like doing laundry. I don't really like, I mean, there's a lot of things I don't want to do, but we do them because we know whatever that we need to, but we really aren't going to do the things that we're not going to be naturally inclined to do things we don't want to do. So, yeah, so then it makes sense to then make the correlation like if I want this. So, I talk about this all the time. Like, I have somebody in my life, who constantly for many years over decades has talked about weight. I want to lose weight. And there's always like, what are you doing or how do you, and I have a, like a second master's degree in natural wellness. I've studied health and nutrition as part of my practice for the last 15 or 17 years. And so I'm not an expert, but like I do know a thing or two. And so I'll
Yep.
say, hey, why don't we take a look at this? Or you could try this. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. And then like they don't do it. Right. And so then it goes on and on
Mm.
and on and on. And this is decades. Right. And so they keep saying, oh man, I want to lose weight or whatever. And like they would say, how are you doing that or whatever. And I would always say it until I got to the point kind of where I was like, wow, I think I'm contributing to the problem here, or I'm not sure what the problem is. So I tried a different approach, and I finally said, like, hey, a lot of times when we say we want a thing, right? We want this thing, and it takes this level of work, right? You have to work at this level, but like you're not. So
Right.
you're not working at that level. So then you don't get the thing. So then you have to maybe take a step back and decide, is this something I really do? I'm saying I want this. I want to lose weight. I want to be healthy. I'm saying that, but I'm not doing the things that are necessary. So then the only question left to ask is do I really want that? And then
Right.
really dig in. Is this something I really want? Because if I did, I probably would do whatever it takes,
Yes.
and go to any lengths. So it might not be something that I want, and that could be okay too. It could be like, you know what, actually, I don't want that. And so then let's work on how can we accept that? How can we just accept our body or ourself or our health for what it is right now? Because that's actually what we are. And so instead of constantly being in this cycle of looking for this thing that we say we want to do, but we're not willing to do it, let's put the narrative where it is, the reality. And I
Yes.
feel like that is not said enough in our society because, and we all do this, people sit on bar stools or in restaurants or by the pool and talk all the time about how I want to run a marathon or I want to do this or
Yep.
I want to do this or that. And you're like, cool, cool. Like, and those people who really do want to do that, they probably will take action towards that. And then other people will make excuses, and they'll say, oh, well,
Yes.
I couldn't do this. Oh, well, I didn't have, I have bad knees or, oh, my mother
It's
died,
hard.
yeah, or whatever. No, they usually don't even say that it's hard because then that would be admitting that I feel like that's something then becomes about them. Like they're saying it's hard. You know what I mean? It's more like I think we
Mhm.
find excuses, these things, these life events, which as we've already established, happen to all of us. Because
But
I say all the
yeah.
time, life is pretty uncomfortable for all of us. It's like
Uh-huh.
it's mostly uncomfortable. There are some glimmers of
Life is hard.
joy and there's some times of joy and happiness, but most of it is pretty uncomfortable.
And
It
that's
just
life.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's life and it's how you navigate your way through it. And
Hmm.
you're right, it's hugely disheartening when people use the excuses more, because now, I mean, in society, everything we've gone through, I think people have never been more open than now to messy stories. Like life is messy, and it's hard and it's all that stuff. And if you really want to get better, you're going to have to put in some effort. It's not going to come to you. You're going to have to put in the effort
Yeah.
and be honest with yourself, own up to your role in it, and then, listen to the experts, follow their lead on
Yeah.
what can help get you from here to there.
And I love what you said before about compassion. That's been a word that's been a main focus of mine for this past year. I mean, obviously, as a mental health professional, it's a big part of my work and training, but there's been some very specific research actually being done in the mental health substance abuse field around compassion, which I literally just became
Mm,
aware of
okay.
very recently. And it is really cool. And so I've kind of latched onto this concept and really diving in. What does that even mean? Like, I think I know what compassion means, but like, what does it mean? Like, what does that look like?
Uh-huh.
And what I've been discovering has been so fun because I think the woman who was trying to describe to me she was the researcher. She runs a treatment facility in our area. It's a pretty famous rehab in our community, and
Uh-huh.
she just got her PhD, and this was her thesis. And I was like, I don't know, like why? What? And she said, well, because she was looking at people who work in inpatient facilities with specifically the substance abuse. It's a big job. It's a big, huge job, and it's not
Oh,
for everybody.
God.
And
Right.
where we came from back in the 80s and 90s was very not compassionate, right? We were labeling people like crazy. They were wearing signs like I'm alcoholic, like just different things. It wasn't very nice, And so what she's
Mhm.
learned is the compassion actually can go both ways too. Like the workers need to be shown that from their employers, obviously, and then they need to be able to give that to their patients who are some of the most difficult people of all that we can work with. They're being cussed at, pushed around, probably, like talked negatively to.
Yeah.
But being able to look them in the eye and call them by their name, like, hey, Beth, it looks like you're having a really hard time right now, you know,
Uh-huh.
or like, oh, we don't need to label. We don't, I mean, we can. I mean, sometimes labels are helpful and important, and some people like that, but we can also just treat people like humans. And so that focus that you shared about how people have shown you that compassion is something that we see, I think, in the recovery world more than any other place in the whole
Yes.
world. And
Hmm.
I love
Hmm.
that part about it so, so much. And I wish we could take that out into I mean, we take it out into the world, but I wish everybody, like my second sponsor said one time, she would say all the time, I wish everybody would get drunk and lose everything so they could come to AA because then they would have a design for living that really works, right? Not
Right.
everybody gets the
Uh-huh.
benefit of all the things that we have. But being able to go out into the world and look at people, even people who are hateful to you or mean or just opposite, we live in a society now that's constantly at unrest, we just for differing beliefs, which is so silly,
Yes.
and we can say, I love you. as a human. You're a human being on
Um,
this earth, and you have the same body parts that I do, and you live here in America, and you deserve compassion and respect. And also, there are consequences for our actions.
yes.
So both things need to be true at all times, and people don't, I don't think, really understand that a lot. And so we
Uh-huh.
can love you and love on you and treat you with respect and also send you to jail. You know,
Yeah.
we
Yeah,
can
and
love
that's
on you and treat you with respect and use your name and get you the help you need and also take your kids. There's a lot of stuff that goes on like that, and that's very compassionate, but people don't see it that way, of course, because it feels yucky. But that's what needs to happen. The accountability
yes.
piece has to be there at all times, or else we
Agreed a
can't
hundred.
grow.
Right. And you grow from what you go through, right?
Yes.
And the judge, he made such a
Yes.
profound impact on the direction I would go next.
Yeah, he did. And thank God
Mhm.
for that, right? And there are lots
Oh
of
my
people
God.
like that, and sometimes they reveal themselves in that way, or sometimes maybe they are not in recovery, or maybe they are closely related to it. Maybe they were raised by one, maybe they were married to one. We don't know, or they learned compassion in a different way. They're working on their own trauma. But, that is, I believe, the easier, softer way, and probably the biggest solution to all of our problems in the world is just extending some compassion that's held with accountability. And
Yes.
I don't understand why this is such a hard concept for a lot of people, but it appears that it is. So,
Right. I agree with you on that.
yeah.
Yeah. It's perplexing.
Where do you like people to get a hold of you if they want to get in touch and kind of learn more about your work?
Yeah, so a few different areas. So the book is available anywhere books are sold. So Stand By is on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Just this week it came out on Kindle.
Oh,
Yay!
yay.
I know some people like ebooks. I have an author's website as well, which has a whole bunch of different things about me on it, which is www.bethmcdmedia.com. And so they can go there as well. And yeah, I just think it's really important to continue to speak out and build a bridge between, me and my message and others. That includes talking with you, because sometimes being a reporter, I've never been in sales. So for me to kind of, pitch a book is a little uncomfortable, frankly. But I've had to also learn to reframe that of, it's not about selling the books. It is about getting the message out there. And this is building the bridge to the people
Yes.
who it might resonate with, who need it.
Mhm.
That, okay, you've lived on the dark side. Let's come across the bridge. Let's come over here and let me show you some steps to take to get over here. And
Yeah.
for women in particular, you and you may be aware of this, but I didn't know this until I went to treatment, which also explains something else, like alcoholism ran in my family. So I was, genetically hardwired. But also, my friends used to say when we would go out, like I would have one drink and I went from 0 to 100. And they're like, why? And I'm like,
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I go to treatment then, and you learn that women are 30% more susceptible to the inebriating effects of alcohol
Yes.
versus men because we women have more fat on our bodies,
Mhm.
and less water and less of an enzyme to break the alcohol down. Well, men have more water in their bodies. Alcohol dissolves in water. So we women are predisposed. We have some unique risks when it comes to alcohol,
Yes.
even in the beginning. And so I wanted to make sure I got that out because, you could see a man and woman at a dinner table having the same drinks, and it's going to affect the woman much more. The
Yeah.
intoxicating effects are going to be much more pronounced.
Hmm. Yeah, you're so right. And they get taken out a lot faster because of our
Oh,
hormone
yes.
structure and our composition. So it is important, and that's how it works. Like I said earlier, we spread the message of hope, so other people can know they're not alone. And so they can read stories that sound similar to them, or they can relate to the feelings, and they can change their lives too. And so thank you so much for your work on that. I'll make sure I link it all in the show notes below. And I hope our paths cross again soon. This was super fun.
Me too. I agree with you. And you obviously know what you're talking about. You're very good. And so I so appreciate because people will listen to the people who know, you know, um, and you are doing great work as well. So I would love to talk with you again in the future.
Oh, thank you. Well, thanks again for your time and your talent and your message. And